Every school, every company, every parent on the planet operates on the same belief. Reward good behavior. Get more of it. But what if that belief, the one quietly running your career, your habits, and your daily drive, is not just wrong, but is the very thing destroying your motivation from the inside? To understand how we got here, you have to go back to the 1960s. At the time, psychology was dominated by one man's ideas, B.F. Skinner. Skinner was a behavioral scientist at Harvard, and his theory was brutally simple. Human behavior is shaped by consequences. Reward a behavior and it increases. Punish it and it disappears. The inner world of a person, their thoughts, their feelings, their desires, was irrelevant. All that mattered was what could be observed, measured, and reinforced from the outside. And the world bought it completely. Schools adopted gold stars and grades. Corporations built bonus structures. Governments designed incentive programs. The entire architecture of modern motivation was assembled around one core assumption: that people need to be pushed from the outside to perform on the inside. It was elegant, it was measurable, and nearly everyone believed it. There was one young doctoral student at Carnegie Mellon University who was not so sure. His name was Edward Deci. Deci had noticed something that Skinner's model could not explain. Certain people seemed to pursue their work with a level of intensity that no reward could account for. Painters who worked through the night with no audience. Scientists who ran experiments no one had asked for. Athletes who trained alone for months before anyone was watching. Where was the external reward in any of that? Deci began to wonder whether something else was driving human behavior. Something internal, something the behaviorist model had never bothered to look for. So in 1969, he designed an experiment. He recruited college students and gave them a puzzle called the Soma cube, a three-dimensional spatial challenge that most people found genuinely enjoyable. He split the students into two groups. In the first session, neither group received any reward. They simply played with the puzzle. In the second session, one group began receiving $1 per completed configuration, roughly $8 by today's standards. The other group continued with no payment. Then came the critical moment. In the third session, the payment stopped for everyone. During each session, Deci introduced a free break, a period where students were left alone in the room with no instructions. They could play with the puzzle or pick up a magazine. No one was watching. The question was, who kept playing? The unpaid group barely changed. Their interest remained steady across all three sessions. The puzzle itself was enough, but the paid group told a completely different story. The moment the money stopped, they disengaged. Not just back to baseline, below baseline. They spent less time with the puzzle in session 3 than they had in session 1, before any money had ever been introduced. The reward had not added fuel to the fire, it had put the fire out. Deci published his findings in 1971. The reaction from the academic community was mostly skepticism. Psychologists trained in behaviorism found the results difficult to accept. Some questioned the methodology. Others dismissed the effect as too small to matter. So Deci did what any good scientist does. He ran more experiments. He refined the design. He tested different populations, different tasks, different types of rewards. And then he brought in a collaborator, a fellow psychologist named Richard Ryan. Together, Deci and Ryan spent the next 2 decades building a body of evidence that would eventually become one of the most replicated frameworks in all of modern psychology. They called it self-determination theory. The first reason rewards fail is simpler than most people expect. They shift where you place the credit. When a person does something they enjoy, the brain tells a quiet story. I am doing this because I want to. The activity belongs to them. It feels chosen. And that sense of ownership is itself a source of energy. The moment a reward enters the picture, the story changes. Now there is a visible reason for the behavior, and the brain, always trying to make sense of things, starts attributing the action to the external cause rather than the internal one. I am doing this because I am being paid. The identity of the action shifts from self-directed to other-directed. Remove the reward and the original internal story is gone. What remains is a hollow version of the behavior, performed out of habit or not performed at all. Psychologists call this the overjustification effect. The second reason rewards fail goes deeper. They destroy the tolerance for difficulty. A 1998 meta-analysis by psychologist Judy Cameron reviewed 128 separate studies on external rewards and motivation. The finding was consistent and uncomfortable. Tangible, expected rewards, the kind used every day in schools and workplaces, reliably undermine people's willingness to persist through challenging tasks. This matters enormously because almost every meaningful goal involves sustained difficulty. Learning a skill, building a business, mastering a craft. These things require the ability to push through discomfort for months or years with no guarantee of a reward at the end. When external rewards train the brain to expect payoff quickly, that tolerance disappears. The person is left with a mind that will only move when the next incentive appears. The third reason is the one that surprises people most. Rewards do not just reduce motivation. They can make performance measurably worse. Psychologist Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School spent years tracking the creative output of professionals across multiple industries. Her conclusion was direct. Intrinsic motivation is the single most reliable predictor of creative performance. External pressure, even well-intentioned external pressure, consistently narrows thinking, reduces risk-taking, and shrinks the range of possible ideas. And then there is the reason no one talks about, the one that makes the others make sense. Rewards change the meaning of the work itself. In 2000, economists Yuri Gnesi and Aldo Rustaccini published a now-famous study of Israeli daycare centers. When parents arrive late to pick up their children, the daycares introduced a fine. The logic was Skinnerian. Make lateness costly, behavior will change. Late arrivals increased. Before the fine, parents felt a moral obligation, an unspoken contract of respect and consideration. The work of showing up on time felt meaningful. It meant something. But once a fine was introduced, the relationship became transactional. In a transaction, unlike a moral obligation, can simply be paid off. The internal meaning of the behavior had been replaced with a price tag. When the fine was eventually removed, late arrivals remained elevated. The original meaning could not be recovered. The damage was quiet, invisible, and permanent. This is the most dangerous thing about external rewards. Not that they stop working, but that by the time you notice they have stopped working, they have already dismantled something that cannot easily be rebuilt. So what do you actually do with this? First, understand that Deci and Ryan were not saying rewards are always harmful. For repetitive tasks with clear correct answers, mechanical work, simple compliance, external incentives can function exactly as Skinner predicted. The danger is applying the same logic to creative, complex, long-horizon work. And that is exactly what modern life keeps doing. Second, protect the internal story. When you begin a goal, ask honestly, why am I doing this? If the answer is something you genuinely care about, protect that answer. Be careful about layering in external rewards, public accountability structures, or performance tracking in ways that shift your reason from inside to outside. Not because those tools are useless, but because once the internal story is replaced, it is very hard to restore. Third, learn the difference between controlling feedback and informational feedback. Deci and Ryan found that not all external inputs kill motivation. Feedback that tells you that you are genuinely improving, that you are more capable than you were yesterday, actually strengthens intrinsic motivation. It feeds the psychological need for competence without rewriting the internal story. What destroys motivation is feedback that feels like control, deadlines framed as threats, praise tied to compliance, rewards that signal someone else is pulling the strings. The structure of feedback matters as much as the content. Fourth, seek difficulty that belongs to you. The highest performers studied in the research on intrinsic motivation were not the ones who avoided hard work. They were the ones who chose difficulty that felt personally meaningful. They were not grinding through tasks someone else had assigned. They were pursuing challenges they had selected, which meant that when the work got hard, the difficulty felt like evidence of progress rather than a reason to quit. And finally, build environments that trust the internal drive rather than replace it. If you manage people, the research is consistent. Autonomy supportive environments, where people have meaningful input into how they work, where progress is recognized rather than controlled, and where the why behind the work is clear. Consistently outperform high-pressure incentive systems on tasks that require creativity, persistence, and sustained effort. Not because people in those environments work less hard, but because they work from a place that does not run out. Here is the reframe that changes everything. At the beginning, the question was, how do you get someone to do something? And for 100 years, the answer was, give them a reason from the outside. But what Deci and Ryan spent their careers proving is that the most powerful motivation the human brain is capable of was never something you add. It was always something you protect. The discovery that changed how we understand motivation was not about rewards at all. It was about what happens when the brain is finally trusted to want things on its own, and what quietly dies when it isn't.